Ever feel like you're drowning in information? Wanting to understand those big, important ideas, but not quite having the time to wade through all the details.
Totally. It can be so overwhelming.
Right. Well, that's where the deep dive comes in. We do the heavy lifting so you don't have to. And today, we're tackling a classic, a real behemoth of Western thought, Plato's Republic.
Oh, yeah. We're going deep on this one.
But don't worry. Think of this as your express elevator to the top floor, hitting all the key insights. And to really make sense of it all, we're going to start with the grand finale, Book 10, before zooming back out to see how all the pieces fit together. Sound good?
Perfect.
Okay, so Book 10. This is where Plato brings a lot of his big ideas to a head. We get his final word on poetry, his thoughts on the soul's immortality, and then this absolutely mind-blowing story, the myth of Let's start with his take on poetry. It's pretty clear he wasn't exactly a fan, huh?
Well, he was definitely skeptical. I think what's interesting is why. You see, Plato saw poetry and art as imitations, and imitations of imitations at that. He had this idea of forms, these perfect, eternal blueprints for everything that exists. So let's say a carpenter makes a bed. That bed is already an imitation of the true form of bed, the perfect ideal. Now, when a painter comes along and paints that bed, they're creating an imitation of an imitation, like a copy of a copy. The further you get from the source, the less clear the image becomes.
Ah, so it's not about the artist's skill, but the inherent distance from the real deal. Like he's saying, art is just a shadow of a shadow.
Exactly, and his concern goes deeper than just accuracy. Plato argued that imitations, especially in art, tend to appeal to the more emotional, less rational part of our souls. He even gives this example of how we can be moved to tears by a tragedy on stage, even though it's not real. It's like we allow ourselves to indulge in feelings that we might otherwise try to control in our everyday lives.
Yeah, I get that. You can get so caught up in a story, even if you know it's fiction. So is that what led him to want to, well, censor or even banish poets from his ideal republic? That seems a bit extreme, doesn't it?
It does. But his logic was that poets, by presenting immoral behavior or by playing on our emotions, could corrupt citizens. They could weaken our ability to reason and lead us away from virtue. You can almost think of it like being constantly exposed to unhealthy emotional junk food.
That's an interesting analogy. It makes you think about the debates we have today about the impact of violent or explicit content in the media. Plato was wrestling with those same questions centuries ago.
He was, and he was acutely aware of this tension between philosophy and poetry. He even called it the ancient quarrel. He used some pretty vivid language, too, like describing poetry as a yelping hound howling at her lord, with philosophy being the master, or a mob of sages circumventing Zeus. He really saw it as a fundamental clash between two ways of seeing the world.
So was it a total ban on all art? Or was there some wiggle room?
Well, he wasn't completely against all artistic expression. He suggested that poetry could have a place in the ideal state, but only if it served a clear purpose, like hymns to the gods or stories celebrating virtuous heroes, art that uplifts and educates, rather than just stirring up emotions.
Art with a higher purpose, then. Okay, so that's poetry. Next up in Book 10 is this whole idea of the soul's immortality. How did Plato even begin to argue for something like that? I mean, it's not exactly something you can see or touch.
Right. It's pretty abstract, but his approach was actually quite logical. He starts by pointing out that everything that exists has some sort of flaw or weakness that can eventually destroy it. Think about it. Rust destroys iron, disease destroys the body. It's like everything has a built-in vulnerability.
Yeah, that's true. Nothing lasts forever.
Exactly. So, Plato asks, what about the soul? What are its weaknesses? He identifies things like injustice, lack of self-control, cowardice. But here's his key point. These flaws, even when they're really bad, don't seem to make the soul die in the same way that a disease kills the body. A person can be deeply unjust and still live a long life, right? Their soul might be messed up, but it's still there.
That's a good point. You don't exactly see bad people just disappearing because they're bad.
Exactly. So this leads him to propose a principle. If something isn't destroyed by its own internal weaknesses, then it can't be destroyed by external forces either. He applies this to the soul, saying that even if the body is harmed, the soul itself doesn't necessarily die unless it becomes unjust or unholy, and he doesn't think that happens simply at the moment of death.
So if being bad doesn't kill the soul from the inside, and if physical damage to the body doesn't inherently corrupt it, then the soul must be indestructible. That's a pretty bold claim.
It is. But that's exactly what Plato concludes. He says the soul is immortal and everlasting. He even suggests that this means there must be a fixed number of souls out there.
And he has this vivid description of the soul as it exists in the physical world, right?
He does. He compares the soul in its earthly form to the sea god Glaucus, all bruised and battered, covered with barnacles and seaweed. It's this image of the soul being weighed down and distorted by the impurities of the material world. He suggests that only through reason and philosophy can we start to see the soul in its true, pure form.
That's quite a picture. Okay, so we've covered Plato's views on art and the soul. Now for the grand finale of Book 10, The Myth of This sounds like a story with a serious message.
It definitely is. It's Plato's way of explaining the consequences of our actions in this life and how those actions influence our choices in the next life. The story goes like this. Was a soldier who was believed to be dead after a battle, but his body didn't decompose, and after 12 days, he came back to life. And he had quite the story to tell.
That's one wild near-death experience. What did he see?
Well, he described seeing these two openings in the earth and two openings in the heavens. Between them sat judges who would send the just souls upwards through a heavenly opening on the right, while the unjust were sent downwards through an opening in the earth on the left.
A pretty clear-cut division. Good goes up, bad goes down.
Very straightforward. And was told he was to be a messenger, to go back and tell everyone what he had seen. He witnessed souls coming up from below, all dusty and exhausted, and souls descending from above, radiating light. They all gathered in a meadow and shared their stories.
And what about punishments and rewards for their actions? Was there some kind of cosmic justice system?
Absolutely. For every wrong deed committed, reported that souls faced a tenfold punishment. It's like a karmic balancing of the scales. He described those who had committed terrible crimes, like causing mass deaths or betraying cities, facing especially harsh penalties.
Makes you think twice about your actions. So there were real consequences in the afterlife. But the story doesn't end there, right? There's this whole element of choosing your next life.
Right. After a period of reward or punishment, witnessed the souls being led before the fates, Lachesis, Clotho, and Atropos. They drew lots to determine the order in which they would choose their next life. Then, each soul got to pick from a vast array of possibilities, lives of all kinds. There were even these interpreters who explained the potential consequences of different choices based on what the souls had done in their past lives.
So it wasn't a totally random selection. There was a chance to learn from past mistakes.
Exactly. And Plato stresses the importance of gaining wisdom and understanding the difference between good and evil in order to make the right choice for the next life. He observes that many souls, influenced by habits from their past lives, ended up making bad decisions. Even saw Odysseus, after remembering all the hardship of his adventures, choosing a simple, quiet life for his next go-around.
That's kind of surprising for a legendary hero. It really highlights that worldly success doesn't necessarily equal true happiness.
Exactly. And the myth of concludes with this powerful message. Each soul's destiny is ultimately their own responsibility, shaped by the choices they make. It's a powerful affirmation of the core message of the Republic. Living a just and virtuous life is essential.
So Book 10 really brings it all together, connecting ideas about art, the soul, and the afterlife. Now, to really understand the full scope of Plato's argument, let's zoom out and revisit some of those foundational ideas he lays out right from the start of the Republic.
Right. Book 10 is a powerful ending, but it's built on everything that comes before it. The whole book kicks off with this fundamental question. What is justice? What does it really mean to be just?
Right. And we see those early attempts to define justice. Polemarchus is arguing that it's about helping your friends and harming your enemies, and then Thrasymachus coming in hot with his idea that justice is just the advantage of the stronger.
And Plato carefully dissects each of those definitions, ultimately leading us to his own much deeper understanding. He argues that true justice is a state of harmony within the individual soul. It's when reason is in charge, guiding our emotions and desires. He then connects this idea of inner harmony to justice in the state, where each part of society, the rulers, the guardians, and the producers, functions in its proper role.
He makes that comparison about seeing justice written in larger letters in the state and then in smaller letters in the individual, right?
Yes. It's like looking at the same principle on two different scales. By examining justice in the context of the state, we can gain a clearer understanding of what it means for us as individuals. And throughout the Republic, he argues that justice isn't just something we do because it's beneficial externally. It's an intrinsic good, something that leads to happiness and well-being. It's the opposite of injustice, which creates inner turmoil and unhappiness.
And this understanding of justice is the foundation for his blueprint for the ideal state. Can you give us a quick rundown of that?
Okay, so Plato's ideal state is ruled by philosopher-kings. These are folks who have a deep love of wisdom and truth. They're assisted by the guardian class, responsible for maintaining order and defending the state. And then you have the producer class, who provide all the necessary goods and services.
And those guardians go through some seriously rigorous training, both physically and intellectually.
Absolutely. Their education is crucial and covers everything from music and poetry to physical training. Plato even advocates for censorship of stories and art to make sure the guardians are only exposed to influences that cultivate virtue.
And he had some pretty radical ideas about how the guardians should live, right?
Yeah, some of his proposals definitely raised eyebrows. He suggested communal living and communal raising of children for the guardian class. He even proposed a system of selective breeding to produce the best citizens. These ideas, while controversial, were all aimed at ensuring the guardians were completely dedicated to the state and free from personal distractions.
So the philosopher-kings are at the top because they understand the forms, especially the form of the good.
Exactly. Plato believed that true knowledge comes from understanding the forms, those perfect, eternal realities that exist beyond the physical world. And the form of the good is the most important of all. It's the source of all other forms and the ultimate standard of what is right and good. He argued that those who grasp the form of the good are the best equipped to lead and guide the state towards what's truly beneficial. Think back to the allegory of the cave. It's all about the philosopher escaping the darkness of ignorance and ascending to the light of true knowledge.
And he uses that analogy of the ship of state, emphasizing the need for wise and knowledgeable leaders, like a skilled captain navigating a ship.
That's a great way to put it. Just like a ship needs a competent captain to reach its destination, Plato argued that a state needs philosopher-kings to guide it towards justice and harmony.
Now let's talk about this concept of the forms. It's so central to Plato's thinking. Can you give us a quick, down-to-earth explanation?
Sure, imagine you see a beautiful sunset, a stunning piece of art, a delicate flower. Plato believed that what makes all these things beautiful is that they share in something called the form of beauty. It's this perfect, unchanging essence of beauty that exists independently of any particular beautiful object. And that form is what true knowledge is all about. It's the same with justice, goodness, and all the other essential qualities. The physical world we perceive is just a reflection of this realm of forms.
So the world we experience with our senses is like a pale imitation of this more real, more perfect world of forms.
That's a great way to put it. And the form of the good is like the sun in that world, illuminating all the other forms.
And this understanding of the forms directly relates to his view of the soul, right?
Absolutely. Just like the state, Plato believed the soul has three parts: reason, spirit, and appetite. Reason is the part that seeks truth and knowledge. Spirit is associated with courage and honor, and appetite encompasses our desires and urges. For a person to be truly virtuous and happy, reason needs to be in control, guiding the other two parts in a harmonious way.
It all ties together, doesn't it? Justice in the soul, mirroring justice in the state, both relying on the rule of reason and understanding the forms.
Totally. And Plato also explores how states and souls can decline, moving away from this ideal state. He describes a progression of imperfect forms of government, from timocracy to oligarchy to democracy, and finally tyranny, each reflecting a growing imbalance within the soul as reason loses its grip.
It's like a cautionary tale about what happens when our desires and emotions take over.
Exactly. And he builds this case for why living a just life is ultimately better than an unjust one. He uses this great analogy of a multi-headed beast representing our appetites, a lion representing our spirit, and a human representing reason. True happiness, he argues, comes from reason being in control, creating harmony within the soul.
He even dives into different kinds of pleasures, suggesting that the pleasures of the intellect are the most fulfilling. Right.
He does. He argues that a philosopher, someone guided by reason and the pursuit of knowledge, is best equipped to judge true pleasure, and that the satisfaction that comes from understanding and wisdom far outweighs the fleeting pleasures of the body or even the pursuit of fame and recognition.
So in the end, the Republic leaves us with this idea that living a just life, guided by reason and the pursuit of truth, isn't just the most virtuous path, but the path to true happiness, both in this life and, as the mythoverse so vividly illustrates, in the afterlife.
Absolutely. Plato offers us a truly comprehensive view of justice, the ideal society, the human soul, and the importance of reason.
So to sum up our deep dive into Plato's Republic, we've explored the culminating arguments of Book 10, looking at his views on art, the immortality of the soul, and that unforgettable myth of Then we went back and revisited those foundational ideas: the nature of justice, the structure of the ideal state, the theory of forms, and his understanding of the tripartite soul.
And it's incredible how These ideas, developed over 2,000 years ago, are still relevant today. They really make you think about how we should live and how we should organize society.
Absolutely. And on that note, here's a final thought for you to ponder, inspired by Plato's wisdom. Think about the different parts of yourself, your reason, your emotions, your desires. How can understanding those different parts help you achieve greater inner harmony and make better choices in your life?
It's a question worth reflecting on, and we encourage you to keep exploring these ideas by diving into Plato's Republic and other works of philosophy.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time.